What if everything your parents taught you about money is actually the reason you stay broke? What if going to school, getting good grades, and working a safe job for 40 years is not a path to wealth, but a trap designed to keep you exactly where you are? Sounds impossible, right? Stick with me because by the end of this video, you will never look at a paycheck the same way again. This is the story hidden inside one of the most talked about money books ever written. It is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Millions of people read it expecting a boring finance lecture. Instead, they got a wake-up call that changed how they saw jobs, savings accounts, and even their own parents. Robert grew up with two father figures. One was his real father, a man with a PhD, a stable government job, and a steady paycheck. The other was his best friend's father, a man who never finished 8th grade but built a business empire from nothing. Robert called them Poor Dad and Rich Dad, and their advice about money could not have been more different. Poor Dad always said the same thing: study hard, get good grades, find a secure job, and climb the corporate ladder. He believed the house you live in is an asset. He believed a stable salary was the safest thing in the world. He believed in working for money, year after year, decade after decade.
Rich Dad believed something completely opposite. He said the poor and the middle class work for money, but the rich make money work for them. He said your house is not an asset. It is a liability because it takes money out of your pocket every single month. This one idea alone destroyed everything Robert had been taught to believe. At 9 years old, Robert and his friend Mike wanted to make money. Rich Dad offered to teach them, but not by giving them cash. Instead, he gave them a job. He made them work for 10 cents an hour in his store, and after weeks of grinding, Robert got angry and confronted him. That confrontation became the first real lesson of his life. Rich Dad explained that most people spend their entire lives angry at low wages, blaming their boss, blaming the economy, blaming everyone except themselves. He said the poor stay poor because fear and greed control their decisions. They're afraid of being without money, so they take a job. Then they get their paycheck, and greed and desire kick in, making them want more things, so they keep working harder just to buy more stuff. This creates a cycle. Fear pushes people into a job, money arrives, desire pushes them to spend it, then fear returns because the money is gone and they need another paycheck. Rich Dad called this the rat race, and he said 90% of people spend their whole lives running in it without even realizing they are trapped.
The scary part is that this trap does not care about your intelligence. Robert points out that some of the smartest, most educated people he knew were also the ones stuck deepest in financial struggle. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, people with impressive degrees still living paycheck to paycheck. Why? Because school teaches you how to work for money, but it never teaches you how to make money work for you. This is where Rich Dad introduced a concept that most schools never mention: financial literacy. He said there is a massive difference between an asset and a liability, and most people cannot even tell them apart. An asset puts money into your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. Simple definition, but almost nobody applies it correctly to their own life. Think about your own home for a second. You pay a mortgage every month, you pay property tax, you pay for maintenance, repairs, insurance. Money is constantly leaving your pocket because of that house. According to Rich Dad, that makes it a liability, not an asset, no matter what your bank statement or your relatives tell you. The rich, on the other hand, focus their energy on buying real assets, things like stocks, bonds, rental properties that generate income, businesses that do not need them to be physically present, and intellectual property. These are things that put cash into their pocket whether they're working that day or sleeping on a beach somewhere. Robert explains that the middle class typically buys liabilities they believe are assets,
a bigger house, a new car, a boat. These purchases feel like success, but they quietly drain income every single month. Meanwhile, the rich buy assets first, and only after those assets generate enough income do they use that income to buy luxuries. This single reversal of order is one of the most powerful ideas in the entire book. Poor and middle class order looks like this: work for money, get paycheck, buy liabilities. Rich order looks completely different: work to learn, acquire assets, let assets buy your liabilities. It sounds simple, but very few people actually live this way. Rich Dad also hated one specific phrase more than anything else. He said the words "I can't afford it" shut down your brain instantly. The moment you say that phrase, your mind stops searching for solutions. But if you ask a smarter question instead, like "How can I afford this?" your brain is forced to get creative and start solving problems. He believed this tiny shift in language was the difference between people who build wealth and people who stay stuck forever. It is not about how much money you currently have. It is about how your mind is trained to respond to lack of money. One mindset shuts doors. The other mindset forces you to find new doors nobody else even noticed. Robert also talks about a concept he calls the biggest trap of the middle class, and it revolves around something everyone loves: a stable paycheck with steady raises. Every time Robert's real father got a raise, he upgraded his lifestyle: bigger house, nicer car, more bills. His income went up, but so did his expenses, so he never actually got ahead.
Rich Dad called this keeping up with the Joneses, but from the inside. It is not always about competing with neighbors. Sometimes it is simply about feeling like you deserve more because you are earning more. The problem is, the moment your expenses rise at the same speed as your income, you are permanently stuck, no matter how much money you make. By this point in the book, Robert starts to understand something that most 9-year-olds never think about. Being rich has almost nothing to do with how much money enters your hands. It has everything to do with how much of that money you actually keep, where you put it, and whether it multiplies while you are not even watching it. And this is only the beginning of what Rich Dad has to teach him. In the next part, we go deeper into the real difference between working for money and owning a business, the truth about taxes that the rich understand and the poor never learn, and the exact reason why so many lottery winners and high-income earners still end up broke within a few years.
Let's talk about something most people never question: the concept of a job itself. Rich Dad believed the word job was actually a trap disguised as safety. He broke it down in a way that stuck with Robert forever. He said a job is literally just an abbreviation for just over broke, and once you hear that, you cannot unhear it. Most people chase job security their entire life. They want a stable paycheck, a predictable schedule, and a boss who tells them exactly what to do. Rich Dad said this feels safe on the surface, but it actually creates a dangerous kind of dependency. You become so reliant on one single source of income that if it disappears, your entire financial world collapses overnight. This is why Rich Dad pushed Robert and Mike towards something completely different from a young age: understanding how businesses actually work, not just working inside one, but understanding the mechanics behind it. He wanted them to see money from the owner's side of the table, not just the employee's side, because those two perspectives are almost like different languages.
To explain this clearly, Rich Dad drew something he called the cash flow quadrant. On one side, you have employees and self-employed people. These people trade time directly for money. If they stop working, the income stops immediately. On the other side, you have business owners and investors. These people build systems and put money to work, so income continues even when they are not physically present. Most people spend their whole life trying to move from employee to self-employed, thinking that owning their time equals freedom. But Rich Dad pointed out something surprising. Self-employed people often work even harder than employees because now they are the business. If they stop, everything stops. True financial freedom lives on the business owner and investor side, where systems and assets generate income independently. This is a hard pill to swallow for most people because switching sides requires a complete change in thinking. It requires taking financial risks that a steady paycheck never demands. It requires learning skills that school never teaches, like how to read a financial statement, how to evaluate a real estate deal, or how to understand a stock's actual value instead of just its price. Now let's talk about taxes, because this is where Rich Dad's lessons get genuinely shocking. Most employees get taxed the moment they earn money, before it even reaches their bank account. Their company takes out taxes first, then hands them what is left. This is called earning, then paying taxes, then spending whatever remains. The wealthy often flip that entire order. Business owners earn money, spend on business expenses and investments first, and only pay taxes on what remains after that. Rich Dad explained this is not illegal trickery. It is simply understanding the rules of money that the government itself created to encourage business growth and investment. This single difference in tax structure can be the reason two people earning the exact same income end up in completely different financial situations 10 years later. One person hands over a huge chunk of their paycheck immediately with almost no control. The other structures their finances legally to keep far more of what they earn, then reinvests it to grow even further. Robert makes it clear this is not about breaking rules or avoiding responsibility. It is about financial education, something schools almost completely ignore. You can be a straight-A student with a medical degree and still have zero understanding of how money actually moves, how debt can be used strategically, or how taxes function differently depending on which quadrant you operate in. This lack of education explains one of the most fascinating patterns Robert discusses in the book: why so many lottery winners and professional athletes go broke within just a few years of earning massive amounts of money. It sounds impossible on paper, millions of dollars gone. But according to Rich Dad's philosophy, it makes perfect sense once you understand the real cause. These people suddenly receive huge amounts of cash, but their financial mindset never changes. They still think like someone chasing a paycheck instead of someone building assets. So the money gets spent on liabilities, mansions, cars, luxury items that drain money every single month, instead of being placed into things that generate income. Within a short time, the liabilities eat away everything, and they are back to zero, sometimes even in debt. This is why Rich Dad constantly repeated one particular phrase throughout Robert's childhood. It is not about how much money you make, it is about how much money you keep, and how many generations that money can work for you. A person earning a modest income who understands assets can end up far wealthier than a person earning a massive income who understands nothing about where that money goes. Another lesson Rich Dad taught revolves around something almost nobody discusses openly: the fear of failure. Rich Dad said the poor and middle class are taught from childhood to avoid mistakes at all costs. Get the answer wrong in school, get punished. This creates adults who are terrified to take risks, terrified to invest, terrified to start a business, because failure feels dangerous and shameful. But in the real financial world, failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process that leads to success. Every successful investor Rich Dad knew had failed multiple times before finding what worked. They lost money on bad deals, made wrong predictions, and had projects collapse. The difference is they treated failure as feedback, not as a final verdict on their worth or intelligence. Robert eventually applied this lesson directly to his own life as a young adult. His first real business venture, a nylon wallet company with his friends, completely collapsed. Products got copied by competitors, cash flow dried up, and the business folded. Instead of quitting and running back to a safe job forever, Robert used those painful lessons to understand cash flow, marketing, and business structure at a level no classroom could have taught him. This is the uncomfortable truth Rich Dad wanted Robert to understand early. The educational system rewards people for not making mistakes, but real financial success requires making plenty of mistakes, learning from them quickly, and adjusting your strategy without giving up entirely. People who avoid all risk their entire life often end up the safest and also the most financially stagnant. There's also a fascinating section in the book about the difference between an asset column and a liability column on a personal financial statement, something Rich Dad insisted every person should track constantly. Most people only look at their income and expenses, their monthly paycheck versus monthly bills. But Rich Dad said the real story of your financial future is hidden in your asset and liability columns, not your income statement. If your asset column keeps growing every year while your liability column stays flat or shrinks, your net worth compounds over time almost automatically. But if your liability column grows every time your income grows, you can earn more and more money every single year and still never actually become wealthy. This explains why some high-earning professionals remain financially stressed their entire career. By now, Robert had learned lessons most adults never fully grasp even after decades of working. The rich do not avoid liabilities entirely, but they understand the difference clearly and prioritize assets first. They do not fear taxes. They understand how to structure income legally. They do not fear failure. They treat it as tuition for real-world financial education that no university offers. But there is one more massive lesson still waiting, the one that ties every single idea in this book together and explains exactly why financial education matters more than any degree, any job title, or any single paycheck you will ever receive in your lifetime. Continue listening for the final part, where we reveal Rich Dad's ultimate secret about making money work for you permanently, and the real reason most people never escape the rat race, even when they desperately want to. Now we arrive at the lesson that changes everything Robert had learned up to this point. And it starts with a simple question Rich Dad asked him one afternoon. He asked, "Do you want to work for money your whole life, or do you want money to eventually work for you?" Most people never even consider this question because they are too busy surviving paycheck to paycheck to stop and think about it. Rich Dad explained that the ultimate goal is not simply earning a big salary. The ultimate goal is building enough passive income from assets that it fully covers your living expenses. Once your assets generate more money than your liabilities cost, you are no longer dependent on a job. You have officially escaped the rat race, whether you are 25 years old or 65 years old. This concept is called financial freedom, and Rich Dad made it clear it has nothing to do with being a millionaire. A person with modest assets generating enough income to cover a modest lifestyle is financially free. A person earning $500,000 a year but spending every single cent on liabilities is still trapped, no matter how impressive their income looks from the outside. Robert breaks this down using a simple but powerful visual. Imagine your income flowing in from your job. That income first flows into your expenses, taxes, food, housing, and daily bills. For most people, that is the end of the story. The cycle repeats every single month for their entire working life. But for people focused on financial freedom, income gets redirected into the asset column before expenses even get touched. Those assets, whether they are rental properties, dividend-paying stocks, royalties from something they created, or shares in a business, generate their own separate stream of income. That new income then gets reinvested into more assets, creating a snowball effect. Over years, this snowball grows large enough that it eventually produces more income than the original job ever did.
This is precisely why Rich Dad hated the traditional advice of just save your money in the bank. He said inflation quietly eats away at cash sitting in a savings account every single year. Meanwhile, real assets tend to increase in value and generate income at the same time, working in your favor instead of slowly losing power against rising prices. He also introduced Robert to something most people find intimidating at first, the idea of using debt strategically. Most people think all debt is dangerous, and for liabilities, that is completely true. Borrowing money to buy a car or fund vacations creates bad debt that drains your income. But borrowing money to acquire an asset that generates more income than the loan costs is what Rich Dad called good debt. For example, if someone borrows money to purchase a rental property and that property's rental income covers the loan payment while still leaving extra profit, the debt is actually working in that person's favor. The bank's money is being used to build wealth for the investor, not the other way around. This idea alone terrifies most people because it goes against everything they were taught about avoiding debt entirely.
Rich Dad was not reckless about this idea, though. He constantly emphasized financial education as the foundation before anyone attempts these strategies. Understanding accounting, understanding how to read financial statements, understanding market cycles, and understanding risk management are not optional extras. They are the actual skill set that separates successful investors from people who lose everything chasing quick wealth. This brings us to one of the most important warnings in the entire book. Rich Dad said that the biggest risk in life is not investing, not starting a business, and not making mistakes. The biggest risk is staying financially uneducated your entire life while blindly trusting a job, a pension, or government support to take care of you decades into the future. He pointed out that the world constantly changes. Companies downsize, industries disappear, pensions can fail, and economic conditions shift unpredictably. People who rely completely on a single paycheck with zero financial knowledge are placing their entire future in the hands of circumstances they cannot control. People who build financial literacy and multiple income streams create their own safety net instead. As Robert grew older, he combined every lesson from both of his father figures. From Poor Dad, he learned the value of education and staying committed to constant learning. From Rich Dad, he learned that traditional education must be paired with financial education, or people risk spending their entire life working hard while staying financially stuck.
Robert eventually became a successful entrepreneur and investor himself, building businesses across real estate, education, and multiple industries. He credits almost all of it back to those early lessons from Rich Dad, lessons that had nothing to do with fancy formulas or complicated math, and everything to do with mindset, patience, and understanding how money truly moves in the real world. The core message of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is not that jobs are evil or that everyone must become a real estate mogul overnight. The real message is far more personal than that. It is about taking full responsibility for your own financial education instead of expecting school, your employer, or the government to hand you that knowledge for free. It is about asking better questions instead of accepting limitations. It is about understanding the real difference between an asset and a liability and building your life around that one simple distinction. It is about seeing failure as tuition rather than punishment and understanding that money is a tool that can either control you or be controlled by you, depending entirely on how much you understand it.
Robert's story shows that financial intelligence is not something you are born with. It is a skill built through curiosity, mistakes, uncomfortable questions, and a willingness to think differently from the crowd around you.
two boys grew up in the same town with access to completely different advice, and one piece of guidance led toward decades of struggle, while the other led toward genuine freedom. That is the complete story hidden inside Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a book that continues to challenge how millions of people think about money, work, and freedom decades after it was first written. The lessons feel just as relevant today as they were back then, maybe even more urgent in a world where financial pressure keeps rising every single year. If this video opened your eyes even a little bit, smash that like button right now and hit subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one. Share this with someone who desperately needs to hear it today, and drop a comment letting me know which lesson hit you the hardest. There is so much more powerful content coming, so stay locked in, and I will see you in the next one.